Hello and welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and our main topic tonight, cybersecurity under new regulations. Israel announcing that it will impose new restrictions on cyber exports. And the decision coming as part of Israel's dealing with the deadly fallout from new blacklists. Israeli private cybersecurity firms such as NSO getting sued and blacklisted around the world for alleged abuses of their software, and particularly NSO's Pegasus malware, which has been used against journalists and political dissidents or other figures around the world. But will these new restrictions help in actually supporting the ethical dilemmas that are today facing the world of spy tech? Joining us to discuss are legal counsel to the Israeli digital rights movement, Jonathan Klinger, and Oren Elimelech, founder and CEO of Cyber Team 360 and research associate for the Institute for Counterterrorism at the IDC Herzliya. Thank you both so much for joining us. Now, Oren, I actually want to start with you. How do you see this decision by the defense ministry to put a leash, so to speak, on the cybersecurity export industry?
So the way I see it, that it's pretty much a cover-up, because I don't see any actual way of this happening anytime soon. And I just see this as, showing to the Americans that Israel is trying to abide by the right rules. But again, setting a rule according to one or two company doesn't mean that all the rest are as dangerous or acting in misconduct as to the way they believe. But again, I see that as a cover-up, because I don't see this happening anytime soon, or that once a sale of a software is done, they'll be able to enforce that.
Jonathan, same question to you. What regulations have been installed to date, and how does this change things, and how do you view those changes in terms of their efficacy?
So let's start by understanding the new draft. The new draft actually says that before any sale to any third country, that country would need to certify that the technology is only used to fight terrorism and severe crime. Severe crime would be defined as any crime which the punishment would be over 6 years. Now, this, in fact, is a problem, because countries like China or Russia define terrorism in a lot of cases where we define people as political activists. Anyone trying to promote free speech would be defined as a terrorist, or even in Hong Kong would be subject to severe criminal sanctions, as we see in Russia with the opposition leader Navalny. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that actually all we have here is a declaration which goes from the mouth and then clicks, and that's it, because all that country needs to do is to warrant that it will only use that technology for those purposes, in the same way that a lot of teenagers press and click a statement saying they're over 18 before entering adult sites. It moves away from being more liable. Instead of telling these companies you have to actively manage the liabilities, you have to have a person on board if you deploy such technologies. You have to have an internal compliance mechanism allowing civil rights activists with transparency. You have to let people know that that technology is being used to track them, even if it's only after a few years or months. You have to act with transparency and allow transparent and independent board members to review your policies. Without saying all of that, all we have here is a big nothing, which is only seen as sanctions, but it won't affect the current situation.
Well, so more to that point, we've heard criticisms that this end user agreement, as you're describing it, which again allows the buyers of this technology to sort of define things, and there's still some leniency and some room for interpretation here. But in addition to that, it's been noted that this form, this end user agreement, is actually not even filled out by the end user, but rather by the company that wants to sell the product. Oren?
I totally agree. And I agree with Jonathan that, there's no way to enforce that. And it's just, it's verbatim. There's no actual process behind that. And once a company that sells declares that it will abide but according to the rules, I don't see that happening without a formal structure of compliance or audit, an ongoing process, because the company can says, okay, it's going to use accordingly. But again, as Jonathan described, who defines accordingly what is legit or not? And also, they can use it after the fact, and without a due process that is ongoing, how would you know it's not being infringed?
All right, now we know that Israel's draft army actually really does churn out expert after expert in cybersecurity. That's it's part of our defense initiative. But with that in mind, then these people who become experts in the field, they often leave into the private sector. So, what degree, if any, would you consider the Israeli government or the defense industry to be culpable to some of the actions and sales that are being made?
I would say that this process will actually cause a lot of Israelis to go out of the country even more. That will expedite the process. And, our smart brains will leave the country. And just recently in the news, just a few days ago, the Ministry of Export declared that it's going to try to bring back, some of the brains and improve and have more benefits to encourage, residents that have left the country to come back to Israel. And this is actually a step in the wrong direction. We will lose money, and they will set up companies abroad, not in Israel. So we will lose also the brains and the money going out. And I see this as actual a process that doesn't help, but encourage us even further to less become a cyber nation.
So, Jonathan, more about the damages. Coming back maybe to that, we're seeing really very serious reports coming out, and you and Oren are both basically saying that this is lip service on the part of the Israeli government. So between the United States government blacklists, Apple suing, and various individuals suing, government leaders like Emmanuel Macron from France raising these issues, what kind of consequences are these companies like NSO going to be facing in the future, if any?
First, you have to remember that NSO, and still everything is pending in court. We can't say for sure that they did whatever people claim that they did. But there are a lot of good companies that export good technology that we want to have outside and is used day to day, not only to fight terrorism, but also to increase security. And these types of technologies, we want them deployed in as many countries as possible, which are technologies that would help encryption, that would help not only governments, but also private individuals. Now, what we can do nowadays, first of all, is to fix the bad reputation that Israel has and to show that we do have the right technologies here that help people, that Israel has great minds that work for public good and that we do a lot of good things, not only just help governments fight terrorism, but also help have a safer internet. In order to do so, again, we have to have more people involved, both from civil society, from the universities, and also from the government. Again, I don't think that having the government go into the algorithms deployed is a good thing. No one would trust a company that the Israeli government sits inside their operations, but we do have to have some kind of scrutiny by the government and some kind of appeals board and allow victims of misuse to come to Israel and to sue for damages, even if it's here. That's what we have to do first. And we have to come and say, if any government abused its power, let the people who were hurt come here, sue that company and the government, and have everything with open doors, transparent, and to help clear the name of everyone else who didn't do anything wrong. Because when we have 2 or 3 rotten apples, we don't want to mess up the whole tree here.
So, Owen, back to you. What kind of regulations would you like to see? And how far do you think that they could go before crossing the line, as Jonathan just insinuated, that at some point, the government regulation and interference might actually be a bad thing? Where is that line, as from a professional point of view?
So I agree with Jonathan, and it's a very blurry line. But again, I'm going to go to a different, analogy. I'm sure you all know Marvel. So they always say, with great powers comes great responsibility. So it's pretty much there. So we need to have responsibility. So companies, such as NSO or Condiro or any other. So again, as I said before, and Jonathan described very articulately, for one or two apples, you don't want to rotten the entire tree. So we want to have a process that has compliance and audit that is ongoing, that reviews the usage that it's being done, both by the side of the company developing the software, selling, and the company that is receiving that software for use against terrorism. We don't want that to be used against dissidents or journalists, again, as defined such as an act of terror or crime according to that specific destination country. But this should be an ongoing process, and that process should be reviewed by an external auditor set that is agreed by both sides, and also in accordance to the Israeli government. But again, that gives still to a private company the capability to have a due care and a due process entailed inside. So I think by having this process with transparency and having something that is continuously going will provide the assurance that it's not being used in the wrong way. And this should be also reviewed and reported to have transparency as a report showing to US or other countries, France, Germany, whatever, that we're doing that correctly. But again, it's not just for show, as you said, again, just to seal the lips. This should be an ongoing process, transparent, that the companies should abide to. Thank you.
Would you support in the future, Oren, maybe a blacklist, a preemptive blacklist in terms of who they can and cannot sell to, in terms of regimes with spotty human rights records, for example, China, Saudi Arabia, et cetera?
Yeah. Yes, I would. I think that is correct. And, same way as that you has several countries you don't want to sell arms to. Yes, I would believe that is also correct, because that destination country will use that tool in the wrong way, because there is no way to enforce the way that it's going to be used internally once that sale has been done. So they can actually use it in an unlawful way.
How do you suggest that actually be done? How do you prevent actively this technology from reaching the wrong hands? Because again, I imagine that it could be purchased by somebody independent and then sold to a bad actor. Is that possible?
It is. You can have, intermediate, somebody in the middle being sold out of Israel with a company offshore that you have no review upon. So it's going to be very hard. So you need to have the responsibility built into the company. That's why I said
So are there regulations in Israel that enforce that sort of investigation into their clientele, or are Israeli companies, at least today, free to basically sell to whomever they want?
No, if you're an Israeli company that wants to export any kind of technology which may have some surveillance use, you have to obtain a permit from the Israeli Ministry of Defense, and you have to specify which country is the target and which authority in that country. If there's an intermediary, he has to obtain a license as well, and that's also in order to prevent bribery, and also to prevent misuse. So the whole field is regulated. The thing is that when issuing these orders, no one looks at human rights issues. What we looked for is whether these countries would abuse the algorithms against Israel and whether these countries are enemies or partners of Israel and whether they have mutual interests. If they have mutual interests with Israel, and if we can assure that they will not use these tools against Israeli nationals, then usually, until recently at least, there wasn't a problem selling these types of technologies to them. And that's the big thing, because there's no mentioning of human rights, of respect, free expression, journalism, protected individuals. None of these words exist in the military jargon. That's the thing here.
So why isn't Israel or why aren't Israeli government officials more invested in reining these companies in and the sale of their technology? Because as you both have basically alleged here, that this regulation is really just for show. Why why would Israeli government officials not be more motivated to actually do something?
It's all a balancing act. You need to balance two things: the revenues you generate from these technologies, which could be substantial in taxes, in salaries, in employees in Israel, and on the other hand, the damage to Israel's reputation. It's the same thing that we had with the forex and binary option industry a few years ago. As long as everything was minor, there weren't many complaints, we could have let that industry exist in Israel. Once we see that it harms the reputation of Israel worldwide, we have to start discussing it, and we have to stop the damage to the Israeli reputation. Uh, we have to balance because there's a lot of jobs at stake here. It's a big part of our technology industry. And you have to ask yourself, why was that in the first place?
So, first of all, I guess, Oren, back to you. Do you think that there's a chance that if Israel actually goes through with some of these regulations, that Israel's persona or image abroad would be improved to a marketable degree, that maybe NSO and other such companies would be removed from the blacklist?
I hope. There's no way to see what the future holds. That is a step in that direction. Again, it is the first step in the show, as we say here, because it wants to show a due process, and I think that is the first step. But again, I think there should be more content and more process in terms of compliance and audit in order for this to be a feasible thing that actually holds the company responsible in the right way.
Have you seen a fallout, a negative fallout, or a spillover of the negative press affecting other cyber companies like your own?
Yes, actually I did, because I'm involved in not only in Israel but abroad, and I received several questions from colleagues and peers around the globe asking me things around here and there, how it's going on.
Wow. I mean, how would you respond to something like that? Do you just say, "Oh, don't worry, I don't have anything to do with it," or what do you say to assure investors that a cyber company is not involved in anything nefarious?
Yes, again, it's only about offensive security, and as Jonathan described, currently it's only a process if that company is exporting something that can be used against harm about Israel, but again, nothing to have to the human rights or privacy. In terms of the companies I deal with, are most security and defensive tools and processes and software. So I tell them this has less to do with that side, and this is again just the beginning. And as I described in the beginning, I think this is will take some time to go into effect, because this will not happen overnight. And this, again, needs to be more mature.
All right. Jonathan Klinger, final comments maybe about some of the regulations that are most likely to be enforced or to come about in the near future?
So I don't see any new regulation coming in the current political situation. Both Naftali Bennett and Interior Minister Shaked are friends of NSO's executives. Our current minister Benny Gantz was previously an executive in company that was supposed to also do something similar, the fifth dimension. And you see these people that they finish their government jobs, they will jump to a tech company job that will have this position. I don't see them limiting their potential of doing business after they retire in a few years. I also think that if we look at the broader picture, it's our job as the people who pay the taxes that to show people that they're accountable. If you have friends working there, you have to go and tell them, guys, you're doing something immoral. I know that the pay is high, but you can have other jobs. You can go and leave work if you know that there are human rights violations in the place you work for. Having responsible people and having a responsible society is the way to go here. I don't see any other way to deal with that because our regulators have too much to lose if we close NSO down. As we saw, companies like NSO were used as a part of diplomatic engagement by Israel, as a tool to promote Israeli diplomacy worldwide, as a tool that only governments that are friendly to Israel would receive. So we don't have any government to rely on here.
All right. Well, Jonathan Klinger, Oren Elimelech, thank you both so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you and share your insights with us. And for everybody else at home, I'm Aaron Porras. Please tune in next time on Insider for more on everything Israel. If there's a topic that you'd like us to cover next, let us know about it in the comment sections online. And finally, for more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv and sign up for our brand new streaming platform, ILTV Plus. We will no longer be showing full episodes, unfortunately, on YouTube or on social media. Thank you again. Be well. We'll see you soon. Oh, and Jonathan, thank you guys so much again.